Hi, my name is Mauricio González-Forero, and the central question driving my research is why did the human brain evolve? Now, a major pattern in human brain evolution is the massive expansion in the size of the brain over the last few million years, and this is shown here in this plot. So here we have that chimpanzees now have a brain size that's about 2 times larger than expected for their body size. And a few million years ago, Australopithecines had a brain size that was just a little bit larger. But over time, in this lineage, the brain massively expanded so that humans have now a brain size that's over 5 times larger than expected for our body size. Now, this massive brain expansion is thought to actually have led to large increases in human cognitive ability, but there is a long-standing question into why did this massive brain expansion happen, and why didn't it happen in other lineages to a similar extent? Now, there is a lot of hypotheses to try to explain why large brains evolved, and they can be sort of classified in the 3 categories shown here. Those sort of emphasizing that ecological challenges promote brain expansion, social interactions promote brain expansion, or that cultural interactions, or sort of, for example, having to learn from others and accumulating knowledge in the population promote brain expansion. Now, these hypotheses are very actively tested, and this is the standard approach to test these hypotheses is by using correlational analysis, as shown in these figures, where some variables are picked as describing the hypothesis, and whether that variable is correlated with the brain size, well, then that is interpreted as supporting the hypothesis. But that approach is problematic because it's a correlation. We don't know the direction of causality. And on top of that, we actually have that, well, if we're actually interested in understanding the evolution of the human brain size, well, humans are essentially one data point among all these species, and that means you cannot actually do these correlational analysis to address the problem. So basically, addressing why the human brain size evolved has been a challenging problem because we lack research tools to infer the causes of actually what's an effectively an evolutionarily unique event, because we're looking at the single lineage and what the process that happened over that lineage. And so we are at a loss. We don't have tools to actually address that problem very effectively. So I've been putting together mathematical tools to try to address that, and I suggested a promising way forward is what's sometimes called simulation-based inference, and this is an idea that's been actively used across science. And what you do is basically you just take empirical data that you feed into mathematical or computational models that can replicate the event of interest, which here is the human brain expansion, and then you use statistics to see which model best explains the observed data. This approach has been very successful across science. However, it's been notably underexploited to understand why the human brain size evolved. So I've been putting together mathematical tools to fill this gap. And the first step has been to formulate a mathematical model that can replicate human brain evolution, human brain size evolution. And I call that the brain model. I'm not going to go into the details of the model, but basically what the model does is, well, it gives predictions, quantitative predictions for the evolution of body sizes and brain sizes over ontogeny. So the lines, the blue line here is the predicted body size over the life of the individual, and the pink line is the predicted brain size over the life of the individual. And the dots are the observed values for an average human female. So for these parameter combinations used here in these figures, we have that the model actually can recover the evolution of adult brains and body sizes, matching those observed in humans. Now you can actually change parameter values, and these parameter values are actually described by these 2 elements here. So we have a pie chart, we have a curve here. We don't have to worry about what they mean, but essentially they just describe parameter values that the model has. And using the parameter values indicated here, the model recovers the evolution of adult brains and body sizes of Homo habilis, which have relatively small brain sizes. And if you change the parameter values involved in this pie chart and curve, then you actually can recover the evolution of all these different of the brains and body sizes of all these different hominin species all the way to Homo sapiens. And by doing a sensitivity analysis, what you can see is that actually what's causing the brain expansion in the model from the small brains in Homo habilis to the large brains in sapiens and Neanderthals is actually experiencing a challenging ecology and what's called cumulative culture, or basically the ability to learn from others and accumulate knowledge in the population. So what is causing brain expansion here? It's not having to cooperate or compete with other individuals, which has been a leading hypothesis over the last few decades. Now, I wanted to understand more deeply what is causing brain expansion. For example, I wanted to know what is under selection. Is selection actually for brain size that's driving this, and if so, to what extent? However, I couldn't actually address that. And the reason is, well, there's been a long-standing lack of synthesis, mathematically speaking, between development and evolution. And that's a problem that has been in the field for 100 years. Basically, the mathematical tools that we have consider evolution by neglecting development in one way or another. So because the model here actually considers development quite explicitly, I actually didn't have tools to model or to understand evolution very deeply. So what I had to do was to put together a new mathematical theory that integrates development and evolution. I call that Evo-devo dynamics, and it yields actually quite a lot of insights, filling this gap of long-standing lack of synthesis between development and evolution. And I'm just going to give here the key insight of the theory. So here we have that, well, what a classic evolutionary theory gives, and this is actually from the Landy equation. And what you have here is a fitness landscape, and the fitness landscape for two traits. So we have that if the population is somewhere in the fitness landscape, then natural selection is going to push evolution up the landscape, and evolution stops when the population reaches the peak of the landscape. Now, what development does is that it creates genetic variation between the traits so that it diverts evolution in some direction, but it actually just it is just a transient effect. Eventually, the population just converges to the peak of the landscape. So in that sense, development has minor evolutionary effects in this theory because it just has a transient effect by diverting evolution in some direction. You always end up you're reaching some local fitness peak. Now, in this new integration of development and evolution, what this shows is that, well, actually, if you want to understand the evolution of the phenotype as the climbing of a fitness landscape, you have to also follow the evolution of the underlying genotype. And if you do that, then there is a relationship between the two that emerges because of development. That is given by this path. So this relationship, again, given by this path, is sort of the relation between the genotype and the phenotype that emerges over development. And that means that there is genetic variation exclusively along that path, so that evolution can only happen along that path. And it stops at the peak of this path, not at the peak of the landscape, as it's traditionally assumed. So if there are reasons that, for example, change development intrinsically or extrinsically into some other relationship, for example, here we have a different path, then that changes the peaks of the paths, so that changes the evolutionary outcomes. So in that sense, development has now major evolutionary effects because it can now change the outcomes of the evolutionary process, even if selection doesn't change, that is, even if the landscape doesn't change. Now, in addition to giving these sort of basic conceptual insights to the evolutionary process, this new integration of development and evolution actually gives us the machinery to understand the evolutionary dynamics of the developmental of the brain model that was actually my aim. And this is what I'm going to show here. So this is the brain size, adult body size for a number of different hominins shown in green squares. And the model is going to start right here. And I'm going to run a video where the model is actually going to show the sort of the evolutionary dynamics of adult brains and body sizes. And it's going to start here. So we see here the brain size starts evolving and it converges to small brain sizes. But then I'm going to change parameter values so that we move to the parameters that actually yield the massive brain sizes of humans. And this is what's happening here. So we see now the evolution of these massive brain expansions converging to species one, which is Homo sapiens. Now I can zoom in to see what's happening at each of those time steps. So we see here the developmental process that individuals undergo at this ancestral point. So at this ancestral point where everything starts, we see that individuals develop a brain size according to this blue line. These are the predicted development for the individuals for brain size, body size, the ovarian follicles that individuals have, and the skill level that individuals have over their life. And the observed values for brain size in females in humans are actually shown by these black squares. In chimpanzees are shown by these triangles, and in afarenses are shown by these stars. So what we see here is that, well, I'm going to start the model again at these dot. And when we see here that the brain size starts converging to these small brain sizes, and it just stays there. And then I'm going to change parameter values that actually lead to the massive brain expansion, brain size. And at that same time, we see the evolution, for example, of the growth spurt over adolescence and the long period of childhood that characterize humans. And also we see the massive expansion from about 2 terabytes in adults to about 4 terabytes in adults in terms of their skill level. So what this is showing is, well, the model is actually recovering both the evolutionary dynamics that we observed suggested by the fossil record and the developmental dynamics that we observed in modern humans as shown in these patterns. So the model is doing a pretty good job actually at recovering both things. And now we can use the machinery of the theory to try to understand why this massive brain expansion is happening in the model. And this is what I'm going to show here. So here we have the adult brain size and adult body sizes, and the squares are the observed values in a number of different hominin species. The circles are the predicted values by the model when we have the parameter values indicated by these pie charts right here. So we don't have to worry about what those parameter values are, but what this means is that, well, we can recover the evolution of the brains and body sizes of all these different species by changing parameter values. And now we can actually use the machinery of the theory to prove that actually what these parameter values are doing is only changing genetic covariation. They are not changing selection for anything. So the reason that the massive brains are evolving here from afarensis to sapiens is actually entirely due to change in the genetic variation in brain size. And you can actually go further. You can plot the selection gradient for all the traits in the model and see that there's actually no selection for brain size. There's actually selection exclusively for ovarian follicles. And that's what's actually driving the whole thing. So we see that the reason that the brain is expanding in the model is because the brains are genetically correlated with ovarian follicles. And actually you can go deeper and see that and prove that the genetic variation that drives that brain expansion emerges over development when individuals experience a challenging ecology and cumulative culture. So to conclude, what we have here is that, well, we have put together mathematical tools to try to infer why the human brain size evolved, and we have a model that recovers brain expansion, and in this model, that expansion happens because of changes in development, that is in the path on the landscape of the fitness landscape, rather than because of changes in selection, that is not because of changes of the landscape. So that means that the effects of experiencing a challenging ecology and cumulative culture that cause brain expansion are actually because of changes in that path that generates genetic variation between ovarian follicles and brain size. So in a sense, what's happening here is that the reason that the brain size expands is because it's essentially a byproduct of selection for ovarian follicles. So that actually matches the notion of Gould and Lewontin of spandrel. Essentially, the brain here is just a byproduct of selection for something else. Now, if you're interested, well, this has just been published and it's open access, so you can have a look anywhere you are. And with that, I would like to thank my collaborators, my funding sources, and you for listening. Thank you very much.